You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is the Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The podcast for the universe.
The Energy is Love
I just got bit.
podcast.
Yeah, you did. I saw it fly off and
Did
land
you?
on his little paw.
Cocksucker. Goddamn sons of bitches.
That's how we're starting off the show.
Okay.
Devin,
It's
you.
still there.
I know,
It's
it's
gonna
gonna,
get
it's gonna get me all night. You're breaking in the new camera setup.
Right.
Yeah, this is the first podcast that we've recorded with it.
I'm a big deal.
We got it just for you.
Right.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And it's positioned so that we see me
Exactly.
and neither of you.
You're the guest.
Right.
It funnels
That's,
right
that's
past
what's important,
us.
I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because I have important things to say and whatever.
Do you want to tell people how we met, Devin?
So apparently we met once upon a time at a hippy dippy festival where Craig approached me one day because I also once upon a time did a podcast, and he approached me as a way to like make friends and network, and I totally blew him off like the asshole that I was. And that was many, many years ago. And then afterward, I guess fast forward until about 6 months ago, I had a client who reintroduced me to Craig and the men's group that Craig is in charge of. And so we came back into each other's social circles in a really
Unbeknownst to ourselves.
strange way, right? And we pieced this together like 3 months later at a barbecue.
Mhm. And I'm very grateful. Do you remember?
Me too.
Oh, big sigh, big deep breath. Do you remember what initially attracted you to the men's group? Like, what was the thing that was like, yeah, I want to give that a shot?
So it was a recommendation from a client, like I said, and he recommended it just because of the personal things I was going through. We just started the divorce process. There was a lot of rough stuff to deal with. And so, you know, as a way to establish a safe and supportive group of men to help me out with the different things that I was going through, I went, and I was expecting the client to show up too, but he never did. Still hasn't. But that's
You know who you are.
Right. You know who you are. Selling bottles. But anyway, that's how I came to the men's group, and that's how I got reacquainted with Craig once again after 4 years or
Yeah, I think
something
that's
more
what it
than that.
was.
I mean,
That's what
I
we
was
figured.
Yeah.
Yep,
It
3
was
or
like
4 years
ago.
My goodness.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, Devin.
Sure. It's good to be here.
I've been excited to have you come on. One of the things that I think is kind of like, it's a good and a bad thing. It's a pro and a con, I suppose, but we tend to draw from like the people that are in our lives to say, hey, come sit and be on the podcast.
Sure.
And so I'm grateful when people do, because it's actually like, it's really hard. I have a group of friends. I have a group of like, when I say my best friends, I mean, they're my best friends in the sense of like, we grew up together. So like, they're the kids that I've
So
known.
definitely your oldest friends.
Definitely my oldest friends. And, you know, growing up, we were best friends. And I think I've asked each of them individually. I may not have asked each of them individually, but I've definitely asked all of them as a whole, like, to come and be on the podcast. And no, nothing.
Right.
Just crickets.
My
Nobody
goodness.
wants to. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you're here, because not everybody wants to come sit down and do a podcast in our backyard.
It's good to be here. Maybe I'll come back.
We'll see.
Right. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah. We'll see how the episode goes. You never know. So we want to talk a lot about... We want to talk about our... This seems so fucking stupid. We want to talk about our whiteness. We want to talk about... It all stems from everything that has gone on in the world lately in regards to race and the Black Lives Movement. All of that stuff that has happened and played out over the last couple of months. If anybody listens to the podcast, they know that it's been very impactful for Stephanie and I, and it's been a big deal for us the last few years. Unfortunately, not the last few years, but the last few months. And you two have been impacted by it. right?
By racism?
Well, by racism and by like just the movement of everything that's going on right now.
Well, definitely by the movement, yes.
Yeah. And so we want to talk to everybody and like anyone and everybody that we can, just to have real open and honest conversations about all different aspects and angles of this thing, because it's like always, in my mind, it's always like, not in my mind in the way that I view it. I'm going to ramble for quite a while. I'm pretty uncomfortable for some reason.
We'll get there.
But in my mind, like literally in my mind, in my brain hole thingy, quick fact, we're going to get squirreled all night.
We are.
We just recently learned that your eyeballs are actually part of your brain. So like during development, they pop out.
They just grow out of your brain.
And so they're actually part of your brain. They're not like some separate eyeball thingy. They're actually part of your brain. Anyways, in my brain, not just the way that I look at race and culture and racism and the Black Lives Movement and everything else that is going on, but like anything else, it's just constantly changing and evolving. And I've been sitting with it for the past several months, and I'm surprised at how dynamic it is, I guess. Does that make sense? Maybe not.
Dynamic in what way? For me, it was finally painted in a very clear way how deep and systemic it is. It's not something that that like just popped up. It's been around for a while, and the situations, like the social and the economical situations that we find ourselves in, are the results of generations of choices and biases and just the manner of living that our ancestors did shapes largely the towns and the situations that we're in today. And so as far as, finding a solution and whatever, like, yes, like it does start with me, so to speak. Also, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to figure out. And to say that it's a simple solution, I feel, is not a very responsible thing to say, nor is it very realistic.
How much, first off, is it something that you feel like you were educated on or had knowledge of, or is it just a whole new world now that you're kind of seeing a whole new lens that you're seeing the world through?
Right, a whole new take on life. So, like with me growing up, I grew up in a small town in Utah. So the questions of racism and stuff, just in my little paradigm of the world, didn't come up a lot. Like, I was familiar with the racial slurs. I was familiar with some people's biases and, unfair attitudes toward different groups of people. But the fact of the matter is, I grew up in like a white middle-class neighborhood, middle to upper-class neighborhood to an extent. Like, the elementary schools that I went to were largely white. Like, there just wasn't a lot of diversity to speak of, just because of where I grew up. And so now that I'm 36, and like, do you tell the world where we are right now?
Yes.
Or is that a secret? So we're in Tooele, Utah, like still a small town.
Yeah.
In a big way. But I'm realizing
fair, we're totally not in Tooele, Utah.
Yeah.
Oh, we're not. We're in Grantsville. Tooele's down the road where I live.
Yeah, it's even smaller out here in Grantsville. But yeah.
No, but now that I'm 36 and I'm able to see the world a little differently, and have more tools to piece some things together, especially when the problem can be very abstract depending on your upbringing and depending on your background and whatever else, it can be hard to really understand. And that is what I came to find out just a couple weeks ago. My life is such has been structured in such a way that I realize I don't understand a lot. I realize that I don't relate a lot. And so for me to carry like
what's
this,
an example?
Well, so this this is the good example that I gave on Facebook just a few weeks ago. So again, I was raised in, small town USA. The majority of the people there are white, and Price is run by white men. And
it's really unique in that,
right? No, it's not unique. It is not unique in that, but it is.
Sarcasm.
And so, right. So I was thinking to myself, what if my situation was different? Like, I have heard so much on social media as a way to like downplay this Black Lives Matter movement. People saying all lives matter, or like either they're downplaying or they're trying to be inclusive. But I found that statement to be pretty dismissive, and this is the reason why. When I was growing up, I thought to myself, so thinking back to my growing up years, I thought to myself, in this little middle class community that I was raised in, what would life have been like if I was Black? Would I have likely had the same friendships? Would my dad have likely had the same job security? Had I, come down with like depression and anxiety, which I have dealt with as an adult, would it have been treated the same way if I also had been Black, seeing these doctors and therapists and stuff in a small town in that setting? And so, this whole train of thought, I came to realize that, just looking at my social media, looking at my friends, looking at the people that I pay attention to, there is so much whiteness in my life. Like if we were to populate a city with the people in my news feed on Facebook, that city would largely just be white folk. And so just to see the lack of diversity in my life, like even though the term segregation is technically an illegal practice in America, my life is largely segregated. And it's not entirely my choice. Yes, it is a choice to live in Utah. It's a choice to continue to, raise a family here and whatever else. But it's the choices of ancestors and such that shape the way a city and town is today. And so I realized that to say something like all lives matter is effectively saying that I value the opinion of all groups of people equally. And to say all lives matter, but then to see that only one group of people in this whole racial conflict is represented so largely in my life that it is the only voice that I hear, led me to see that I am largely underqualified to say all lives matter, when the only voice that I hear, that my life has been structured to hear, is the opinion of a white group of people.
I want to ask you some questions. That's what we do on the podcast, is we ask questions.
Right, we talk about all this. I'm not a professional in anything. So if you feel like you need to roast me in the comments down below, please do.
Do you remember, this thought occurred to me, do you remember the first time that you heard the N-word?
I don't remember the first time, but I do remember that I didn't think it was a big deal in my house.
Really?
It wasn't treated like an offensive racial slur, and so to just say the N-word or really any other type of racial derogatory word was treated as kind of a funny thing. In fact, I didn't realize that until in my early 20s, just because of the culture I was in.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I was a bad person or because I was intending to offend or to be derogatory toward anybody. I just didn't know. And so yeah, it was into my adulthood, getting married and raising kids, I was like, oh, we don't get to say these things. And that was a new lesson to learn as an adult.
How do you feel now when you hear that?
Well, now it makes me cringe. Now it's not okay. Like we don't do that. Like we can talk about things in more sensitive terminology now, and I do my best to teach my children that too. So yeah, it's hard to hear now, especially if it's coming from people who you can tell from the emotion behind their voice that they're meaning to be offensive.
So do you still hear it regularly?
No, I don't. And largely I don't. At work and at home, like in my family and stuff, no. And I probably misspoke if I led you to believe that I heard it all the time, but in the event that it did come up, it wasn't treated as something that you correct. It wasn't treated as, something that you tell your kids that we don't say that and why.
Would you correct it now?
Yes, I absolutely would now, and do.
I remember, and I've shared this with Steph before, but I remember the neighbor kid next door using it in regards to, I want to be so careful that I don't accidentally say it as I'm trying to remember what the hell it is. How does it go? Do you remember?
Oh, eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Yeah. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Catch a tiger by the toe.
Yeah, catch a tiger by the toe, right? That's in my, growing up, that's how that little rhyme always went. Catch a tiger by the toe.
Right, but that's not what he said.
That's not what he said. He didn't say tiger. And I remember I don't even remember what game we were playing or what we were doing. We were like picking sides or something like that, or having to narrow down something like that. And so he used that as a way to narrow whatever down, we were doing as kids. And he said it, and I'm like, what? Like my brain couldn't process through, that's not how that goes. And then I had to sit and think about what he just said. And then there was another one too that I just thought of, if you jerry rig something, and I've heard people reference not jerry rig,
another
but
word.
N-word.
Yes, I've
something.
heard that too.
Oh,
have you ever heard that before?
Well, yeah, I was trying. I'm like, okay, so what's the derogative of jerry rig? I was trying to think. I'm like, crap, I've said that.
Same
what is
word,
that?
right?
But it's
also doorbell
I haven't
ditching.
heard that.
Yes, I've heard that one when I was growing up.
Right.
Because we used
I
to do
didn't
that
hear
all the
that.
time. You didn't hear the jerry rig?
I when you say that, I think I have now, but it didn't dawn on me because I was thinking, what's wrong about saying jerry rig?
Yeah.
Right, jerry rig's fine.
Well,
It's-
I don't know. I'm gonna.
It's all of these
it's
things.
Probably not.
Yeah, it's probably
Well,
not.
it may not be. It may not be.
What was saddening to me was how much of that was just interwoven into culture. So I grew up in this town that we're in right now, same thing as you, small little white town, not even predominantly white, 99.999% just white people that live here. And we don't live in the South. We're far, from some big city where you'd have, or what you would stereotypically have, racial conflict or a lot of races, living together or something like that, like in New York. Or so you would think that this place here would be somewhat sheltered and whatnot. However, I heard this shit growing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea...
And treated it like normal, or at least I did.
Yeah, and so it's how much of... It's not a question, it's a realization on top of a realization on top of a realization of how interwoven within the fabric of society this stuff is.
Yeah.
And I'll stop rambling for a minute. Go ahead.
I don't think you're rambling. I remember my first experience with that word. I wish I could have enough backstory to say now this is where it came from, but it was just such a defining moment. I remember being at school and there was a coal miner in a history book or something, and his face was black from the coal, and I don't remember if they asked who this man was or what this man, I don't remember what the question was. I was little and I was like, oh, I know. And so it was obviously prominent in my life, but I have no memory up until that point. That was when then it was that, and my mom got called in and I had no idea what I did wrong.
I
had no idea because it was something so, I remember at that point, my mom was making it a point to let me know. and also the people in my life around me that was impressioning the young kid that language was not going to be used around me, and then explaining it. But it's kind of a point of, like you're saying, of how ingrained it is. And so, and then I also have given passes that I should not have given because, oh, they're old, they're set in their ways, don't want to upset them, you know. It's just like, oh my gosh, like that is so damaging. That is so damaging. And I didn't realize at the beginning, like I knew that there was white privilege. I didn't know how deep it was, and that my very existence was the basis of every privilege. Every privilege, until we started getting into it and really researching. When you have that switch and you start digging and you see that pretty much I'm trying to look at our lives and think, is there an area other than being cruel, which we were not, but there's so much ignorance and so much things that we didn't see, and very much guilty of being, one of the good ones because we don't see color, one of the good ones, and how damaging that is now. And just you're going from cultural appropriations to whitewashing to white fragility and all the stuff that we were kind of talking about before. And once you really start learning and looking at it and take down your walls, it's like, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in your life. It's everywhere. And then you have your own accountability. Like, are you willing to, once you see something, are you willing to start to live differently? Or do you like your comfort? Are you just going to let it go because, well, it's too hard to fight against it? So when you see it every aspect, what's the next step? What do you start doing to change the dynamic?
Right, to change something.
I've told this story a few times on the podcast in the last few episodes, so I'm not going to recount the whole thing, but it is the realization of like the subconscious inherent racism in my thought process and the way that I view the world that became very obvious to me after an experience recently. Can you think of anything that has become aware, like that you've been aware of recently, or something that maybe you haven't looked at before and now you are looking at it and realizing that, oh my God, it's not like you're doing some racist act, or you're not, it's not like you're perpetuating hate and fear or something like that, but it's like the subconscious thing of the way that you act, or the way that you view, or the way that you judge, or the way that you see, whether it's Black people or whatever the case may be. Can you think of anything?
Like as far as race goes, no, not recently, at least. I found that, like, at work, I work in a pretty diverse place. I was sitting there counting. I mean, especially as far as Utah work communities go. I mean, yes, the biggest group is white, but I mean, we've got Russian immigrants, we've got people from India. We've got a lot of people there, and it's cool to just kind of work with them and just let it all be normal, and we're all doing the same job. But I have definitely seen a certain amount of apprehension and worry based on where I live, and you can attest to that. So life has brought me to live inside a tiny house, which is the most perfect house in the world. But
it's not a tiny house. It's a tiny house.
Like tiny house, like 255 square feet on wheels. But due to Utah restrictions, there aren't very many places appropriately zoned for a tiny house. And so until another place comes up, I'm living in a trailer court in Twilla. And so, yeah, I mean, just the predisposition of the person who lives in a trailer court, even though I know plenty of people who have lived in trailer courts who are great, and I would consider them close friends, or at least friends. And yet I find myself in a trailer court, and I find, that I'm afraid of everybody there. And I mean, granted, weeks have gone by and I realize that things are going to be fine. It's all just people, really, and you learn to deal with people and treat people as people, and you don't worry about the demographic or the group that they belong to. It's all just people. But as far as experiencing a certain amount of privilege, and this may be off topic of racism, I certainly have with where I live. I've never lived in circumstances with limited financial means, let alone had so many neighbors who may fall in that demographic, and people with different priorities as far as how they spend their money, and looking at that and seeing that's not right, and then catching myself and saying they can spend their money how they want. It's been interesting. It's been a growing experience. And granted, that's not racism, but that's learning to catch the thought patterns and change them before they become bigger, or, it's just making those little changes along the way. And so, so that applies.
Baby, do you have anything that, I don't know if I've asked you, or that if you've brought up anything? I know we talked about a lot of different stuff, and obviously you and I are continually talking about things, but have you had anything recently that's popped up in you're like, holy shit, I'm totally guilty of this thing?
Yes, quite a bit, actually. I'm tearing through and I'm doing it wrong, but there's so much information that the way I learn, I want to go through it all, and then I want to learn as much as possible at the beginning, and then I want to hurry up and dive right back into it. Even though they say if you're doing it this way, you're not helping the anti-racism. So that's a struggle, because I'm going to go back through it at the end of this and then do the work. But I am reading a book that the first time I saw the book, the title, I was disgusted by it, because I did not understand. I thought it was promoting white supremacy instead of trying to abolish it and be anti-racist. It's written by a British Black Muslim woman, and it's called Me and White Supremacy. So when I saw it, I was like, oh my God. And then it was popping up in the feed, because we're doing a lot of research. We're doing our best to educate ourselves. And then I was like, oh, that's not what this book is. This book is, it is fantastic. It is fantastic. It is so eye-opening, because you're going through and you're hearing some parts, you're like, okay, I can see that. And when you're doing the work, which we've been doing the work, you see points you're like, yes, that's where I was. And this is where I'm doing better. And then it hits this point pretty early on that you're like, holy shit. I'm driving, listening to this, because I don't have the book. It's an audio book, and I'm listening to it, just like holding on to the wheel. And I'm like, I'm a piece of shit. Like, Jesus. There's so many. The most recent one I was talking about.
You're not a piece of shit, by the way.
But it's okay to realize what you get to work on.
Oh, there's stuff to work on.
Right?
And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, because and it's not things that I thought I was right in. It's things that I didn't have enough around me to know that there was another way to look at it.
Right.
And so when you get that, you can be like, oh, like just take that minute and stop. So, I'm going to draw a blank, because I am so nervous now. I don't know if this...
You can't think of one that pops up?
Oh, I had so many, but this is probably where white fragility comes into play, and now I am nervous about speaking. One of them that came up, like, so much of it is information too, because you're learning how, like, things that you may not have seen just because we haven't been exposed that much, which that alone in itself is a major problem. The fact that, how you mentioned it, it's not segregated, but yeah, kind of is.
But it is, yeah.
Yeah. It's
like, segregation is illegal, but my life is segregated.
It's very, there's very minimal interaction. They were talking about how little boys would be starting at 10 years old, they were no longer viewed as children. And that when you see
in which
a black,
culture?
for African American,
Okay, yeah.
for black, you would look at them and they're going to be judged as an adult, and they can be a criminal, they can be attacked, because so much of the basis has been you're supposed to fear Black people, and they're criminals, and they're everything that the media has put out, not just the media, but like the movies. What was that coming to, or The Birth of a Nation, I think, was that horrific movie where their entire goal was to put fear. So white people were afraid of Black people so they could continue to be abused and owned and just made to work and keep white people
Have
ahead.
you seen any of that?
No, I haven't.
Not the film itself, but because it's old. It's from like back in the early 1900s.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it was a silent film
Oh,
that was literally just like the epitome of fucking racism.
Right.
With the Klan.
promoting racism.
Yeah, it was terrible.
It was instilling it. It was making sure that there was nothing but fear that was driven. And it has changed so much with
and
that.
it was heralded at the time as a great film.
Yes.
Oh,
Like the
yeah.
president, whoever, I think it was Woodrow at the
I don't
time, was
remember
like,
that.
this is, had a screening of it at the White House and everything.
It's interesting.
Mhm.
Interesting to
very-
see where we've come and how much farther we still get
Yeah,
to
I mean,
go.
that's 100 years ago, and
Right.
it's not any better in my book, in my opinion. It's still a shit show.
Mm-hmm. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, babe. I didn't mean to cut you
No.
off.
So they were talking about how boys would start to be seen as no longer children at 10 and be a threat, and that little girls starting at 5 would also be seen as older and more aggressive and more sexual. So when these little girls are violated, they're not a victim.
It's not
They're
treated
the
the same way.
perpetrator in a sense, because they're sexually aggressive.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So I knew that, like, there's like, oh, well, obviously I see kids. I'm not, that's, how do you see people differently? How are you viewing differently? I can't remember the examples that it gave for the most part, because I was like, okay, there are areas where you're like, check. That's an area, at least that I can see at this point, that I do not need to work on. Not that this isn't something that doesn't need to be worked on. I'm not taking myself out of it, but like, thank God there's an area that I don't have to look at myself and be like, son of a bitch. I have issues with men. So, I have a lot of, like, I'm sexist in a sense, and I'm trying to not with that. Men scare me. Men have been violators. And so I didn't think that there was a racism aspect of it. It's just men. Men scare me. And there's that, whole thing that can come with that. But the question that I asked was, are you surprised when you see a Black man that is, because they ask for women and men, that is nice, that is well-rounded, that comes across? And my first thought was yes. And I was like, oh, motherfucker. How was that? So that little bit of surprise when I was, that it's still in there, that programming was in there, even though I don't believe that. I don't think that they're mean. I don't think they're aggressive. I don't think any of those things that the media or the stories and the racism has tried to influence you to believe. It's just that first thought, though, when it came through. So even though I don't believe it, it's like, it's there. It's there, and it's deep. So what else is there? I have to start digging there, as well as so many other areas, because if that goes through your head, it's in there. You've drank the juice, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's in there somewhere. So that was that's just the one that I can think of right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really uncomfortable because it's hard to say that. So I need to just sit in the uncomfortable, because it's hard to admit that.
Yeah.
But
I had one today, and I'm not going to be able to remember it. I remembered it as you were talking.
sorry it took so long.
No,
No,
you're
that's
fine.
great.
Gosh dang it. Yeah, if it'll come back to me, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, I will.
Can you think of any of those, though, Devin? Any of those, like, real subtle, because, like, the way you described of that very first initial flash of your response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then immediately you follow it up, and so that first response almost gets lost, so that you're not really aware of. But that first flash that you reference of, like, yes, and then the next thing's like, damn it, no. that's the systemic part. I think that's the part that we don't really look at or believe or think or even are aware of as a whole, right? When it comes to white people, when it comes to the culture of whiteness, I don't think we really recognize those little small, subtle, tiny little things. Like I was trying to think of, gosh dang it, it was so fresh in my head. I can't think of it now. Let's sit here for another 15 minutes in real awkward silence while Craig tries to remember.
No, but for me, when I first moved to Tooele, when I was driving into work in the morning, there was a moment where the car behind me was driving pretty aggressively. It was enough to definitely catch my attention and put me on edge. He like whipped around me and cut me off. I don't remember exactly what happened. And he like motioned, like made a threatening or offensive gesture toward me while that was happening. I mean,
he flipped you off?
Like it was more like a fist I don't remember. It really wasn't a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I do remember that the fact that this individual was Latinx made it worse for me.
Scarier?
It made it scarier for me.
Yeah.
If it would have been just some schmo white dude, I know that viscerally it would have had a different reaction. But the fact that this gentleman, I don't know how old he is, he looked like he was in his early 20s, was Latinx, made it somehow more threatening. And I remember catching myself like you did with your example. And at the time I was listening to the audiobook of White Fragility, that book by Robin DiAngelo, I believe is the author. If it's wrong, please let me know. And I was like, this is kind of what this is all about. I am reacting unfairly in this situation because he is different from me. And so like I took a beat, I took a breath, I calmed down. I also slowed down so that there was some distance between me and him because he was driving aggressively. But yeah, I mean, it's just that little recent example of catching yourself with an attitude and a bias that is not merited, or making a negative situation worse simply based on race and nothing else.
So now what do you do? Because when you have that point and you catch yourself, I mean, you can't just catch yourself and be like, okay, now I need to watch that. But what do you do to start digging in and see where the roots of that are? So you can start changing that inside yourself.
So I was kind of thinking about what all of that would look like too, because simply doing a 180 and like suddenly like giving or excusing bad behavior doesn't seem to solve anything either. I mean, you know, just in the example that I gave, being like, oh, he appears to be Mexican or whatever word went through my mind, therefore I can allow this. Like, that doesn't make sense either. I do a conscious effort. Like I take some time and I go through a little process when I catch myself in moments like these to remove race and be like, if the tables were turned or the roles were reversed or whatever cliche you want to say, like if this was me or if he was white, how would this be different? And then try to adjust and you know, get a better point of view and a more realistic perspective going through that thought process. Sometimes it takes a minute. But for a lot of little examples, it doesn't take very long. I'm like, oh, like I can tell that I am behaving differently because this person is different. So calm down, or that's not what we need to do right now. We're being unfair. So that's what I do.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say, like okay.
Say the hard
I don't
things,
think that's
baby.
enough. That's
Well, so then what else needs to happen?
First of all, I don't have that answer.
I know, right? I don't
But-
either.
some of the things is like, if that's there, where else has it been? Where else have I done that? Where else am I continuing to do? So then getting curious about every aspect and where does it come from? And just watching how, like really being aware of how you're behaving continually, not just how would it have been different if they were white? I'll change this. How would I have behaved here? But every time you have a moment of being around somebody that's diverse and putting yourself in those situations, like what are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? Where are you going to go from there? Because it's obviously there and it's big. Even if it doesn't come out as a big thing, if it's going to be that reaction, it's big. And it needs to, we can't gently look at it and be like, okay, this is okay. This is where I'm at. We have to like really start digging in deep if any change is really going to occur on the visceral level, as you said, because we can control our mind and get it going. But for that deep interaction that's going to change our behaviors and that's going to key us out of situations, we have to go deeper.
Mm-hmm. And we get to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up, just while we were talking about the emotion of it all, in the book, White Fragility. Sorry, I keep thinking white supremacy, but that's not the book. In the book White Fragility, she addresses very bluntly the role of emotion in this entire, movement of dealing with racism and whatever else. And she said something that was, and she said it more than once and provided examples that was so fascinating to me, that emotions are part of our conditioning. It is completely natural to have emotions, and it is completely natural, and it is very good to be able to have the skills and tools to deal with emotions in good, positive ways. But emotions are part of our social conditioning. If something happens and we respond to it in a specific way, it's because of our past. It's because of past events. It's because of things that we witnessed and things that we still carry with us, like you alluded to. And so that's why when events happen, people can respond to them two very different ways. And so with things like addressing white people and addressing specifically the all lives matter, I have found that in my personal life, it matters a lot to be emotionally comfortable. That it is a high priority to me to be at ease. I've also found that to be at ease, I'm not going to be learning anything, and I'm certainly not going to be improving myself. And so, like you said, to like baby ourselves through these types of mental transformations doesn't really get there. And to understand that to be comfortable is okay, and to understand that to be wrong is okay. Mm-hmm. And to simply shut up and listen is also okay. A lot of times I find that, especially if I'm in, a very spirited debate, a lot of times I stop listening and I start waiting to talk again, mm-hmm. waiting for that moment to jump in and just say all of my words. And that doesn't help me connect with the person that I'm speaking with. It doesn't help me connect with myself. It doesn't help me connect or figure out an emotion or an understanding of what's actually happening. And so yeah, to try to gloss it over and to try to, keep it downplayed doesn't help. And to look at it very, very, cut and dry, like this isn't okay, this is a response that I'm having and it gets to change, is a part of the process of figuring that out.
I think part of the problem, and as both of you are kind of talking about this, because you said like Steph, you talked about being able to go deeper and figure out where it came from or what it's stemming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fear that maybe you have of a black man or a Mexican that cut you off and, you know, said some Mexican words to you. It's supposed to be funny. I was trying to think of Mexican words to say.
Right. The Mexican words.
Yeah, but they're all stereotypical, terribly trashy things to say. Anyways, unless you have like some racist father that raised you or mother or grandparent, or unless you have some experience, or maybe you got beat up as a child by, you know, a group of kids that were black or something like that. It's not justifying the fear that you might exist or that you might have as an adult now, but I don't think a lot of white people have that experience.
And so it can be hard to pin down.
Yeah, and I think the part of it that is like, where did it come from? I think it came from growing up in this country. It came from, do you know what I mean? Because I don't feel like I grew up in a super racist house in any sense of the word, but looking back, I can think of like some just shit that probably shouldn't have been there, right? From both sides, from my mom and my dad to some extent, even though it wasn't overtly racist or anything like that. But yeah, I still have these ingrained subtle things of fear in relation to, so both of your examples, first about the Mexican, and then you didn't have a personal example. You're just referencing questions that were posed in this book about, I sat there and I asked myself those questions, and I put myself in scenarios where, when would you be afraid of a black man? And I can think of plenty of moments when I would be afraid of somebody that was black or somebody that was Hispanic. And then like, I'm so fucking rambly on this goddamn day. What I did was I looked at, like, if I saw a black person, I saw a black man, and I just think of him as a person, right? There's a guy. And then something shifts and he gets angry and he gets frustrated. Now suddenly I'm going to have a stereotype that flips in my brain, and now he fits into another box that I have inside of my head that is, especially if they're like younger, like if they're in their teenage years or their early 20s or something like that, both Hispanics and black men are going to fit into the gangbanger box in my head. They're going to fit into the spot inside of my head that says they're part of a gang. And now, you know, maybe they're dressed a certain way. And maybe they are really part of a gang, but the reality is they're probably not. They're probably just dressed and behaving a certain way. But my brain is going to put them in that box, and I'm going to kind of keep them in that box in order to move around them or move through the experience or through the space. And it's strictly survival based, and it's not right? It's not like I'm really threatened in any way, shape, or form, but I can see how it's survival based, at least from my experience or from my perspective. Long story short, what I'm getting at is I don't have anything to base that off of. I didn't grow up around gangs. I didn't grow up around a lot of like violent minority people, right? I didn't have that experience.
Pointed out or
is
singled
that your police
out.
Training?
It's not even that, because it predates that.
It predates that?
Yeah, it predates that. And so in my mind, it's the stereotype of the violent young Hispanic male or the violent young black man. And it doesn't even have to be young, right? And as soon as, and this is going to sound terrible, but
say the terrible things.
Yeah, because this is a white podcast with a bunch of fucking white people talking about white shit. But I feel like, and we do the same thing as white people, and I know I do the same thing as myself. It's like people will shift, right? So you'll see a black person shift, and then suddenly they turn on blackness in a sense. Am I just like way off? You're looking at me like I'm fucking crazy.
I just was surprised. To keep going.
This seems very judgmental.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, I feel like I'm being very judgmental. But what I'm saying is, I'm trying to get at, like, I understand where white people are coming from with their ignorance and their inability to almost see this thing because it's so ingrained in us. Where like you would take the average, I'm trying to think of a stupid movie that like shows it pretty well.
Pretty much every movie that well, I guess that's white superiority and white savior. So never mind.
Well, no, there's like movies where you'll have the main character or a character that is black who is like, you know, smart and outgoing and articulate and intelligent and all these normal, see, that sounds terrible, but, and then they're harassed or they're attacked or they're bullied or something like that. And then they like react. And when they react, they'll turn on like this. I'm not judging it.
I think that's called tone policing.
I think it's called your husband's a fucking idiot.
I don't think my husband's an idiot. I
doesn't
think
know what the fuck he's talking about.
I think this is just another area that you can look into and learn.
It's not even tone.
Like,
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm trying to explain. This is the thing.
Should they?
I'm not judging.
Like
I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying they can't do this or they can't do that. I'm only trying to talk about white people and how we react and how we respond. And
but that's up to us. That's not up to.
It is up to us to some extent.
I guess that's the us and them. That's not what.
But
we should be
if you're not aware of it, then it's not really up to you. Well, so if you have an ingrained response that's based off of safety and survival, then you can't disregard that. You can't ignore that because it's subconscious. So you're going to react and respond in a certain way, shape, or form. Like for you, it's men, right? It's any man. It doesn't matter if it's black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. And you're going to react a certain way to men first. You're going to have an initial reaction to men first, and then you're going to go past that point. I think in situations where people feel threatened or when they're even slightly afraid, right? We see it with all these stupid fucking white people that call the police on black people who aren't doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So they have just the slightest inclination of fear for some reason. Now they immediately respond to the extreme where it's like, well, fuck, they're clearly gangbangers or they're going to go back to their car and get their gun or he's going to attack me and rape me or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter what it is. But that thing that takes place inside of the white person, I think people have a hard time admitting it and acknowledging it and realizing it because it's so subconscious and ingrained just because we fucking have grown up in this country. I don't think it has anything to do with you were born in a racist house or yes, that's applicable at times, but I think it's so subtle that people I think people struggle.
Well, you can't change what you don't see, but I feel like
I went all over the place.
No, you did. You did great.
I did terrible.
I'm opinionated. I feel like and this isn't probably this day and age. This is when my eyes finally opened. I thought my eyes were opened. I thought I was one of the good ones. I check all that category and it's sad, but I can move forward. I can be committed to learning and educating myself more. I don't see how people cannot be just even a little bit curious with everything that's happening, with everything that's going on, with they're seeing all of these horrific acts that are occurring against Black people, and not just Black people, against the Hispanic community, against Natives, against every, BIPOC is, with everything that's going on, how can you not get just a little bit curious? And just check yourself. Before this started to really hype up in the media, and that's terrible verbiage. Before the incident with George Floyd, I had questions in my brain. I don't feel like I benefit or use white privilege, but I recognize that I am white, that I live in a very white community, and that I've always lived in a very white community, and I don't have a lot of diversity experience. So I'm sure there are some, but I can't see it. So we had that conversation. So even before that, there was that little bit of a question that maybe there's something else that I should be looking at. I did not know that wasn't even the tip of the iceberg, that there is like, oh, yes, you're right. Yeah, there is a lot more you need to learn. So when I understand not seeing things, but to be so, to choose to be so blind to it that you're not even willing to kind of look is where I kind of struggle with that. I'm like, there's something. Is it that you don't want to? Because it's hard to find out that, oh my gosh, I have racist behaviors.
I don't think they do know that there is something.
You don't think that there's even a little inkling?
So can I jump in?
Devin, hold on a minute. I'm teasing. Go ahead.
No, but just some additional insight with that. Like, with the nation that we live in, whiteness is the standard for all the things. And so if you find that you fit in the basket of whiteness, you are suddenly normal. And the rest is other. Mm-hmm. So it just goes back to the little things like when you think about U.S. history, you are going to be thinking about a bunch of powerful white men. And yet we need to add the little caveat of Black history in order to talk about the Black heroes and the events for Black people in U.S. history, because you need to say Black, because history is white history. You need to say Black history in order for people to understand what you're saying. You need to say women's history if people are to understand what you're saying, because history is white history in the United States.
You're correct.
And so when a person, what I think is when a person is raised, to fit all of the different measurements of whiteness and is therefore normal, measured by whiteness, it's really easy to not want to do that type of introspection or to be curious, because according to the yardstick that you're measuring your life by, you're doing it all normally. It's not okay, and it's not right, but it's really easy to gloss over the work that a person needs to do or should do or whatever we want to say. It's easy for me to do that if I can justify that my life is normal.
So we could,
I don't know.
Yeah, we could argue this point, but it's pointless to argue this point.
Right.
Because it doesn't really matter.
And it's not okay.
It does, actually.
It does matter. And it's not okay. But that happens.
What I'm saying is us arguing about it doesn't matter. I want to pose a greater question. What the fuck do we do about it? How do we reach the white person that doesn't think they're racist, right? I haven't been talking to a lot of people, but I've been trying to engage with people online, which is a terrible fucking place to do it.
Right.
And I know it, and it's a waste of fucking time, but I feel like I have to do it. I can't, I'm just done listening to things that are pointless and ignorant and stupid. And so I try to engage with them, and they always argue that they're not racist. They always argue that, do you know what I mean? I think they literally don't see it. So then it's like, how do we get them to see it? How do we get other white people? We had this guy on last week. Oh my God, Jerome Kirstoff. And he talked about how, like, the institutionalized racism that exists in this country, the foundation of this country, essentially was white people. Like, we built it, right? And so we built all of this. We created all of this shit that took place, right? So we are going to have to be the ones to undo it, right? And I agree with that. I think that it's going to take white people realizing that, oh, wait a minute, our ancestors totally fucked up, right? Everything is totally ass backwards, and it's continuing in today's day and age. So how do we get them to see it? Like, what do we do? Yes, we can have these conversations. Yes, we can do all of this kind of stuff. But for me, I feel like I need more. I need something else that I can do to get people to recognize it and realize it, just to fucking start that thing inside of their brain to start questioning. Maybe there's something there. Maybe I need to start looking at it. What do we do? That's the bigger question, I think.
I think that we need to continue to educate ourselves. We need to be willing to learn and not jump in with the savior mentality. Get more active in a variety of communities and groups. And then when it comes time to talking to other white people, let go of our comfort, be able to let go and make it uncomfortable, risk offending somebody and risk their comfort, even when you know that I definitely have specific people in mind that they're going to get really pissed off at me. And it's scary when they get pissed off at me. And not only that, they're going to rally other family members to get pissed off at me because how dare I say something to them? So we have to be willing to change that. Now, at first I was thinking, you're not going to get them that way. They're never going to listen. We have to try and empathize with them. We have to try and reach them on a common ground. And that is completely going into keeping the white comfort level and just really playing, because we don't want to offend a white person. God forbid. How do we, so we need to be able to get past that and let it go and keep educating ourselves and keep, I don't know, I'm probably getting all of this wrong, but I'm trying. And so be willing to get it wrong and keep trying and learn and then do more, because I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I've done it all wrong and I'm committed to doing it better from here on out. I just think that's where we start, and we just keep going. We just keep learning along the way.
What do you think, Devin? How do we reach the ignorant white people that don't think that they're racist or that there is anything wrong? There's so many fucking people that don't think there's anything wrong.
Yeah.
That this is the greatest fucking country, that racism doesn't really exist anymore, that black people just need to quit whining and pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Or really it's white men now that are the most, discriminated against. Like, you hear all the stories, like you hear all the things. The thing is there is not an easy answer, or there is an easy answer with a million different applications. And so in my mind, it's the willingness to be wrong and the willingness to hold back your your rebuttal, or hold back all of your justifications for a certain thing that might be called out or that's triggering a thing within you. Hold all that back and take a second to learn from another person's perspective. That's how it was. I mean, and granted, I'm working on this every day, but with the recent venture down the white fragility rabbit hole, that was the approach I took. I said, let's hold on and let's not answer right now. Let's not defend. Let's not bitch. Let's not be right. Let's not be anything. Let's be teachable, and let's just talk to whoever that was. And I chose instead to learn from a different perspective on purpose. And to just open my ears and listen to what is going on. The thing is, the Black Lives Matters movement is largely the part that I get to play in that is I get to self-check a lot. I get to make sure that my kids don't grow up with the same biases that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. Because this whole thing is generational. This whole thing is very generational. So make sure that my kids have a different environment to grow up in, with different standards and different ideas of what is okay and what's not okay. And more than anything, at first, I came to realize that with the Black Lives movement, the Black Lives Matters movement, Black Lives Matter, I got to listen. I got to be a witness. I got to hear them. They were situations that I did not relate to. They were situations that I did not experience. And so I got to listen.
Rightfully so. I'm glad that you've done it.
And that's where it started.
Okay, but how do we get the white person that isn't willing to listen?
I don't know. How do you get anybody who's not willing to listen to learn something?
I'm trying to think, because I think about myself, like, in particular, because if you would have talked to me a year ago, I would have been like, this is fucking stupid. I'm not going to have this conversation. And it would have been like, yeah, there's a problem, but I'm not going to deal with it. Like, I was unwilling to look. I was unwilling to listen. I was unwilling to not just self-analyze and look at what I possibly have going on inside of me, or my biases or my reactions or my racism that exists inside of me. But I also was just unwilling to, like, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement, earlier in the episode, I think I was referencing Black Lives Movement. But anyways, it's not new. It's been around for a while. It's something that, you know, has been in our society and in culture and in this country for a while now. And this is the first time that I've ever really paid attention or really cared about it. Mm-hmm. Right? A few years back with, like, Ferguson and all the other things that were stemming a few years ago, I didn't care. I didn't pay attention to it. I just didn't care. And that sucks. And
I was somehow exempt.
Yeah, it wasn't here. It didn't affect me. It was somebody else's problem. And in my mind, it was isolated events. In my mind, it was something that existed in those moments and in that place and in that city.
It's the rarity.
Yes.
It's not, yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of, like, what the fuck happened in my brain where now suddenly I see things differently and I'm willing to look. And I don't know what it is. That's the problem, is I don't know what it is. I can't see what the moment was where it flipped. I think it's a series of events. And so in my mind, when I'm trying to fucking communicate with these ignorant white people that really piss me off and, like, get really I'm so fucking angry at how stupid and ignorant and unwilling they are to even just look at something else besides your stupid fucking
I've worked for everything
shit.
in my whole life. Nothing came easy to me, so white privilege is not a thing.
Or, like, I have also suffered because I had depression growing up, and just missing the point of if you had depression and dealt with racism, like if you were depressed and Black, rather than depressed and middle-class white in a whitewashed community, like, how would all of that be different? Like,
I just saw a thing where they're not even acknowledging the depression is a real thing with the Black community. They are labeling, therapists are labeling when you have them coming for help for depression, anxiety, they're labeling with anger issues and aggression. Like, how? They can't even get help.
right?
So in my mind, back to how do we fix white people? Yeah. I think it's just continually putting it in front of their face.
I think so too.
I think it's just continually not allowing them to, I shouldn't say, because it sounds so, not combative, but it sounds
confrontational.
Yeah, it sounds so confrontational.
It takes away the comfort.
Like,
right.
that was a racist thing to say, or let's try that again and less racist, or, you know,
Watch your tone. Don't come at me too rough.
Or whatever. But it takes courage to do that.
So in my mind, that's all I'm trying to do. And sometimes it feels like it doesn't feel like it's doing anything. I don't feel like I'm reaching anybody.
I feel like you are.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, apparently, I think you're right. I think you need to keep putting it out there, and I think it needs to stop being toned down. Because how many situations have we seen on the news where our questions are, yeah, but what happened? Because you know that there's other stories. What happened before that? What happened after that? They don't show the whole thing, and there's still events coming in. They will pause a situation and have some usually a white woman come on, and now this is what happened beforehand, and try and explain it and keep, you know, they're completely taking you away from the situation and guiding you to a different point of view. So there needs to be, when you're seeing it over and over again, my switch was seeing George Floyd over and over again, and the audio and hearing him call for his mom. That allowed that switch in my brain. When I had that thought that came through my head, and that changed everything. So quit toning it down, quit making it comfortable for the white people, so the white people can still look like the heroes, and the Black people can look like, well, they're look at this record, they were a criminal, so this is why this happened. Bullshit. just like put it out there. Stop making it comfortable. Hold white people accountable for their actions and show what is really happening. So then you can't look away. So then you have to see it. So then it's there because you are getting that image. You're getting that real image. And then I think, I don't know, in my nice little fantasy world, I think change can occur.
It is changing. It is occurring. I think it is happening. So
I don't know. I'm going to keep learning, though. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep fumbling and saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing and just keep learning and keep trying.
In this space, Devin, in this area of everything that we've been talking about, what is like really prevalent for you right now? What are you really, when I say what are you into, that makes it sound like we're, you know, like what's the good movie that you're watching? Or, but like, what is it that you're focused on right now? For me personally, I've been like consuming so much information and looking at different things, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like one thing will take me down this rabbit hole and I'll think about this thing or I'll think about that thing. And so what's really present for you right now in this space that you're researching or learning about or thinking about or sitting with?
So along these lines, I don't remember the title of the book, and so I'm going to look it up.
Yeah.
I'm an audiobook person also, and so I don't actually read.
There's some books that you
I
have
listen.
to. After you hear it, you're like, my eyes have to eat that.
I don't.
I have no?
No.
Okay.
So I wanted, here it is. I wanted, oh God.
We're about
Here it
to
is.
listen to
I
it.
know. We're not. I just forgot the title. I wanted to learn a different take of American history, and this was recent. This started about a month ago. There have been some personal things transpire in my life that has kind of led me away from this temporarily. But the book I downloaded is An African American and Latinx History of the United States by Paul Ortiz. I came to realize that there is so much about the history of the United States that I was not allowed to, allowed in a big way. It was never brought to my attention. And race plays into that. Race is a big part of that. And so there are stories and events that I just simply didn't ever learn because it wasn't the whitewashed version that was approved. And so that's the step that I'm taking right now is learning the Black and the Latinx history of the United States, because it's nothing that I have any experience or any knowledge of, to be perfectly honest. And so that is how I am learning and growing in that way.
What about you, babe? What's like?
I'm on.
Go ahead.
To get that book title again.
Tune in next week and you'll hear it on the episode.
Right?
It's in the comments below.
I'm doing the same thing. There's challenges that you can do. There's email challenges where it'll give you resources. So I can look it up. Maybe we'll put it on there. It was with the YMCA, I believe, in Salt Lake that put on this challenge, and it sends you an email every single day. And it's like, do you have 5 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes or a half hour? Do you have an hour? Kind of where you're at. So there's different things that you can click. Can I commit 5 minutes? And it'll be just like a little synopsis of some information. There's so many avenues for information. There's, I believe you can still look up the Me and White Supremacy Instagram challenge that they have. And it's
was that an Instagram? I thought it was a book.
It is a book.
Oh, but it was also...
I didn't see it on Instagram. She talks about how she did the challenge on Instagram. So there's so many different avenues. There's garbage out there, and there's the propaganda that's going to lead you. So just, so that's what I'm doing. I'm reading. I'm not getting my information from white authors and listening to, like, I know everybody has a voice, right? However, I don't want to hear any more from the white community on that. I think it's important that white people talk to each other, but I'm getting my information from BIPOC authors and speakers, and that's where I'm trying to digest.
Well, what's BIPOC?
Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Indigenous. That's the thing I couldn't think of. I was thinking Indian, and I'm like, that's definitely not right. That's definitely not what that stands for. I don't have a problem playing the fucking idiot on the podcast.
It's not an idiot unless you're like, nope, everything I'm doing is right. I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't have to learn.
No.
You guys are wrong. You guys are so stupid. You're like, what is that? I want to learn that.
I'm going to pull it up too so that I don't get this wrong. A lot of this stuff for me hits home in regards to the policing and the police work and everything that's going on in that space just because of my history. And it's like the friends that I have, the people that I've, are friends with on Facebook are police officers, or they're in that community, or they support the police strongly. And so much of, like, I'm trying to figure out how to crack that fucking nut and figure out how to reach those people because they feel like they're so focused on what they believe. On YouTube, it's free right now. I don't know if it's going to be free for a long time, but it's a documentary from a few years ago, and I just found it today, so I don't even know if it's worth it watching, but it looked like it was going to be worth watching, and watched just the beginning of it while I had time. But it's called 16 Shots, and it's about, so it's a Showtime documentary, but it's about, let's see, a 17-year-old back in 2014 who was shot and killed by a Chicago police officer, and it initially was trying to be covered up by the department, and so the documentary just tracks the story of that one individual that was murdered. What else am I doing? Fuck, I don't even know. Honestly, I'm taking a break to some extent because I've been like so overwhelmed with it and so like bombarded with it lately that I've kind of had to take a break for a moment and just kind of clear my head and let some of it marinate and sink in. Because this is one thing that I listened to it was another podcast. It's some douchey white guy that I don't even really like, but he had on a bunch of black people and it had this big Zoom call with all of these different black people. And it was really nice because he did an okay job of shutting up, but he did talk quite a bit. But they were talking about everything, and they were talking about a lot of different topics. And the way that they were coming at them from, I mean, they were talking about things like reparations. They were talking about some of the civil rights movement. They were just talking about everything, right? But they were coming at it from really intellectual avenues that I hadn't necessarily heard before and or thought of before. And I'm going to pull that up too, hopefully, so then I can remember the name of it and share it. But anything else, guys, while I search for this?
I was just thinking, I wonder, like, I'm exhausted and I'm heartbroken. And I don't have the experience that you have. I would like to know more. I can't imagine the inner turmoil that you are going through with being biracial and having so much of it that you're seeing that you have kind of like pushed aside and mostly identified as white, and what that's bringing up now with the awareness of that and being like, so, I don't know.
Are you asking me?
I am asking you.
We'll have to do that on the next episode of the podcast.
Okay.
Did you know that I was a half-breed, Devin?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm Hispanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Mexican.
Well, considering
My dad
you call
is,
your children mija and mijo and stuff, I was starting to piece that together.
Yeah. I have to go. I've been watching a lot of garbage on YouTube. What about you, Devin? Anything else?
No.
No? Thank you. I don't think I'm going to fucking find it. Oh, my goodness.
I think if you Google white douchey guy, it'll pop up.
He'll come right to the top.
My phone heard Google.
This is terrible. We're not going to sit here and watch
That's
Craig
okay.
play with his fucking phone. Thank you so much, Devin.
Sure.
I really, really appreciate it. I was thinking also, if you're down for it, I can put the link to your blog where you document the tiny home experience, if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't know you had a blog.
That next tiny place is my blog.
We'll throw it in the show notes so people can go and read.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.